All right, Daryl Davis, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Nathan.
Just to, I guess, kickstart us here, real simple. For anyone who's not familiar with your work, can you just give a brief background on who you are and how you came into the work that you do?
Sure. My name is Daryl Davis, age 62, born in Chicago, and music is my profession, but bettering race relations is my obsession. And in doing so, I have had the 37 years of meeting and sitting down and having interviews and conversations with white supremacists, starting off with the Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis, alt-right, and just individual racists. And I have found over the time, I never set out to do this for 37 years by any means. I just set out to find out, how can you hate me when you don't even know me? And that question occurred to me at the age of 10, following a racist attack on me as I was marching in a Cub Scout parade. Some people were throwing rocks and bottles at me. I was the only Black person in the parade, and I just did not understand how somebody could do that when they didn't even know the person. So over the years, I began studying race on my own. I learned about anti-Semitism, racism, all that kind of stuff. And I decided, well, who better to ask that question of? Because nobody could answer it. Just say, well, Daryl, some people are just like that. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. And later on in life, as an adult musician, I happened to meet a member of the Ku Klux Klan who was in my audience at one of my performances, enjoying the music. And he approached me and had said that he'd never heard a Black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis. And I wasn't offended by any means, but I was rather taken aback that this guy didn't know the origin of Jerry Lee Lewis's style, which came from Black blues and boogie woogie pianists. That's where rockabilly and rock and roll came from. And I proceeded to tell him, and he was incredulous, didn't believe me, even after I told him Jerry Lee is a good friend of mine and has told me himself. But he wanted to buy me a drink. And I went back to his table, sat down, had a cranberry juice. And then he tells me that this was the first time he'd ever sat down with a Black man and had a drink.
Wow.
And I was like totally mystified, like, how can this be? I had sat down, at that point in my life with thousands of white people or anybody else and had a meal, a beverage, a conversation. How was it that he'd never done this? So it turns out he admits to me that he's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And at first I didn't believe him until he produced his membership card. And it didn't occur to me that night. He was very friendly, talked to me. We had a good conversation. But a long while later, it occurred to me, Daryl, there's the answer to your question. It fell right in your lap. You didn't even realize it. Who better to ask that question of that's been plaguing you since the age of 10? How can you hate me when you don't even know me? Than to ask someone who would go so far as to join an organization whose whole premise has been hating people who don't look like them and who don't believe as they believe. Get back in contact with that guy and ask him and write a book about it, because no book had been written at that point in time, and still not, on the Ku Klux Klan by a Black author from the perspective of interviewing members. So I did that, went around the country interviewing Klan leaders and members, and the book was published in 1997. And I just now finished, well, just back in October, finished my second book. And so 37 years later, here I am still doing this. And what I've discovered is that a missed opportunity for dialogue is a missed opportunity for conflict resolution. And I've been given numerous Klan robes and hoods, neo-Nazi flags, all kinds of stuff from people who have renounced the ideology as a result of the conversations and friendships, start off as relationships that turn into friendships that we've built over the years through these conversations. They would renounce their ideology. And so I figured, you know what, I need to keep doing this. So that's
Yeah,
where
no,
I'm
it's,
at.
that's fantastic. Have you found, so it's great you brought that up, that initial moment at the bar with this guy who turned out to be a member of the KKK. Have you found that over the course of building relationships with these members and other extremists over the years, that your sort of background as a musician has helped as an inroad to discussing kind of culture in a way, like music and art and media as like a form of like a way to relate to people, in a sort of way that maybe they hadn't thought about before?
That is a big part of it. But also, I had years of prep for it that I didn't even realize I was getting at the time. I'm the child of parents in the U.S. Foreign Service. So I grew up as an American embassy brat living abroad during, from age 3 to my formative years as a teenager. And, you come back every 2 years, back to the States. You're here for a few months or a year and then get reassigned somewhere else. So between traveling with my folks and living abroad as a child, and now traveling around the world as a musician performing, my total cumulative travels have amounted to 57 different countries
Wow.
on six continents. So I've literally been exposed to a multitude of ethnicities, colors of skin, nationalities, cultures, religions, etc. And all of that has helped shape who I've become. And as such, what I've learned, no matter how far I've gone from this country, and when I get back, I conclude one thing: we all are human beings. And as such, we all want basically the same 5 core values in our life. We want to be loved. We want to be respected. We want to be heard. We want to be treated fairly. And we want the same thing for our family as anybody else wants for their family. And as long as we can employ those core values with whoever we encounter, be it domestically or internationally, we can navigate that society much, much better. And that includes white supremacy right here. I'm not saying everybody's going to respond to it the same way, but it will make the inroad a lot smoother to travel.
Right. So I know from just your background and watching interviews from you over the years that you've been able to claim that you've directly de-radicalized somewhere between 40 and 60 members of the KKK, and then over 200 indirectly. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm curious, this is just something I'm interested in, the kind of the post-life of de-radicalizations, of any of those members that you had direct relationships with, do you, to this day, do you keep in touch with a lot of them? What's your ongoing relationships like?
I do keep in contact with many of them. Some have passed on in the last 37 years. Murder, just death, overdose, different reasons, natural causes.
Right.
But I have kept in contact with many of them, and most of them have stayed out. There have been a couple who vacillate back and forth.
Right.
One thing, it's like an alcoholic. You get on that wagon, sometimes they fall off and have to get back on. But one thing that's very important with the de-radicalization is there has to be a support out there for them. It's not like, they made a simple mistake and they can move on with their lives. They have pretty much turned their life over to a gang or to a cult. They've been initialized in. They've been brainwashed into the lifestyle, the propaganda, all this kind of thing. And that group, whether it's a neo-Nazi group or a KKK group or what have you, becomes their family above and beyond all other family, be it biological or otherwise. And so now when they come out, they're out there swinging in the wind. If they came from a family where my grandfather was in the Klan, my daddy was in the Klan, I'm in the Klan, my kids are going to be in the Klan, that kind of thing, it's a little different because, you still have biological family.
Mm-hmm.
And the biological family would disown you if they're in the Klan and you become the, I hate to use the pun, black sheep, right?
You had to do it.
But if, so they're going to reject you and your Klan family is going to reject you. If your biological family was never racist to begin with, and somehow, you became the black sheep and you were out there, getting involved in the Klan, they have disowned you because, they have black friends, they have Jewish friends or whatever, and they don't want their son or daughter at the house when their friends come over and offend their friends. So they disown you. And now you have abandoned your Klan family, for example. Your biological family has already disowned you. So you're out there swinging in the wind. You can't go back to your family that you betrayed, the Klan. You took a blood oath, and now you've betrayed them, and you're speaking out against them. You can't go back,
Right.
And you can't go back to your own family because you have embarrassed them or whatever, or they'll be reluctant to accept you back. Your friends you had from high school, They know you went out and did this, and they don't want anything to do with you. So chances are you will look for some other cult to belong to that provide you with those values. They make you feel important and all that kind of thing. Or you turn to alcohol and drugs.
Right.
So you need that support system. And that's one of the things, that I provide when these people come out. I can be a friend, I can be supportive, give them strength until they're strong enough to navigate, their life on their own.
Right. And you're one guy, and that's why I guess I was curious just in terms of resources and how you navigate that process. Because you're right. I mean, everything you said rings true to my experience, from everybody from extremists to addicts to people that are just living in isolated, lonely conditions. When they have that support network that gives them those 5 factors you listed, the meaning, the like being loved and all that, and then they lose it. I mean, it's like if you're, someone living in the middle of nowhere and this is like the support network you have, and then you abandon that network, it's like, of course, it's like the natural human condition to jump from one extremism to some other vice or some other form of extremism. So I guess, like, in your experience, like, what are some of the key resources or things that, like, do you have like networks that you kind of try to pass these people along to, or because you're one guy, so
I have networks now, and I'm very selective in who I introduce to these people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want anybody exploiting them. I don't want the wrong people using them or whatever. So I'm very selective. There are a couple groups around that I trust immensely. A couple of them are run by former extremists, and Parallel Networks, which is run by a fellow named Jesse Morton. Jesse Morton is a former Al Qaeda
Wow.
propagandist and extremist, and he's a very good friend of mine. Jeff Scoop, who was the head of the NSM, National Socialist Movement, which was the largest neo-Nazi organization in this country. He led it for 25 years. He got out partially because of me, and he put together a group called Beyond Barriers, and he runs that for formers, people coming. He's helping de-radicalize people who are still in, and helping to prevent those who are not, who are on the fence, thinking about joining and things like that. Parents for Peace is another organization of parents who have had kids lost to violence and extremism and things like that. So those are just a couple of the groups that I trust and support. But up until then, it's just been me.
Wow.
It's kind of I have a book. The book made some money. I would fund what I do from the money that I would get from the book, and then of course I'm a full-time musician. The gig money that I would get, I'd put towards travel to go see these people, whether it's an airline ticket or gas in my car, a hotel room, whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I guess what I'm curious about on this topic is that I think most people that I would speak to or that I talk to online more generally, their biggest trepidation with kind of like reintegrating ex-extremists into society is just like, how do we know that these people have really changed? So like, this is the kind of the weird gray area, like you're saying, because sometimes like it is the fact that they're like an addict and they can kind of sway back and forth and they can relapse and all that.
Sure.
So is there a like a strategy or something that you like, some method that you employ with them to kind of help show both everyday people that they might run into, or just kind of the platform that they manage, that they've really changed, and that this is like that there's some form of accountability for them as they continue kind of like integrating into society?
Yeah. A white supremacist or any kind of extremist, black or otherwise, they're not cut out of a standard cookie cutter. They're all individuals, and as you say, some of them, may relapse and this, that, and the other. There's no telltale thing, but those who have been in it for a while, are they getting out of it because they're in some kind of trouble and they're trying to, not go to jail perhaps, or something like that, or for some other reason, and it's not really sincere. So where is the veracity? Where is the transparency? So yes, these are very important things. And that's a good question. I look at their actions, what they're doing. Are they admitting to their crimes? or their transgressions publicly and denouncing it and apologizing for it, or are they just trying to quit and go away quietly and not be accountable for some of the bad things that they've done? And there are those who do that and who are sincere as well. They're just way too embarrassed to
Right.
come public, or they have a job, and if it were to come out, they lose their job that they've had for a
Right.
long
Right.
time, and they got to feed their family, pay their mortgage, etc. So these are all factors you have to take a look into. And yeah, I have met some who try to be slick, and they pretend and they're chameleons. But I also know people who are sincere, and that's what I watch. And I have developed very good intuition over these 37 years. It wasn't like I was born yesterday and just got into this.
Well, yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask you, because like you said, I mean, you have to be kind of careful with who you pick to ally with and associate with this stuff, because when I think about even just myself or other people I might know, there's so many reasons why people would be hesitant to even touch this type of relationship with somebody, because like you kind of mentioned it there, where like you might run into someone who's like a little bit of a shapeshifter, and they might be playing both sides of the aisle at times. And I guess like one of the big questions that I run into a lot is like where is the line? Like is there a line where you're expressing too much radical empathy for an extremist who has the potential to be whatever you want to call it, sociopathic or manipulative to like an abusive degree, like almost like an abusive relationship. Like someone who's like you said, kind of playing you and toying around, and then really they're just taking you along for a ride, which I think is scary to think. If a person like me with no experience was trying to befriend a white supremacist for all the right reasons, could be in a situation like that where it's like I'm thinking I'm making the right inroads, but then really I'm just being played for some other agenda.
You use the exact right word, man, Nathan. You hit the nail on the head. The word sociopathic. You see one of these people, and if you know the signs of a sociopath, stay away. We see one who's leading the country right now, and I don't take that lightly. It's very serious, and these people, anybody can be a sociopath. There's no criteria for black, white, Christian,
Right.
Muslim, whatever. Those people need professional help. I'm not a professional, psychotherapist, psychotype worker. I do recognize the signs of it, and yes, there are some, who are involved in extremism, and they know how to play you. I know when somebody's trying to play me, I say, you know what, I'm better suited directing my energy towards someone else who is more sincere.
Right.
So these are things that you do have to look out for. A sociopath is in a class all by themselves. They don't care about anybody but self gratification.
So this kind of gets us deeper into your own strategy and how you view how your work aligns with other activist style work or other approaches to de-radicalization and extremism. Do you view, obviously you're an exceptional person, you've had an exceptional life, you've done incredible work, but do you view what you do as sort of an anomaly, or do you believe that the type of work you do could be a prescriptive strategy for others, people like me or other people in your community?
What I do, I consider the norm for me, but I certainly realize it is an anomaly and not the status quo for other people. Most people, even white people, let alone black people, most of them don't want to sit down and talk with a white supremacist. I don't have time to talk to those people. I can't stand those people. Why would I waste my time talking to them? And then, I have a lot of supporters, but I also have my share of detractors who feel that, why are you as a black man trying to teach white people how to treat us? That who would do that? What's wrong with you? And then, I've been called a sellout. I've been called an Oreo, an Uncle Tom. I've been called every name but my own. So, there are those detractors there, but I know what works, and I've proven that it works. And I've had the benefit of travel and meeting different kinds of people. My first exposure to school was overseas, kindergarten, second grade, and fourth grade, every 2 years. And overseas, my classes, in the 1960s were full of kids from all over the world. Anybody who had an embassy in those particular countries in which my parents were assigned, they all had their kids in the same school. So, at this desk next to me on my left was somebody from Czechoslovakia. To my right, somebody from Japan. Ahead of me, France, Germany, Switzerland, all these different embassy kids. That was my first exposure to school. And when I would come back home here to my own country, the US, my classes were full of either all Black kids or Black and white kids, meaning I was in the still segregated school or the newly integrated school. And there was not the amount of diversity in my classroom that I had overseas, just Black kids or Black and white kids. That multicultural scenario, if you will, was 10 years in the making. I was already seeing it 10 years earlier. So I was literally living
the future.
in the future. Yeah, exactly. And so I know it can work. I know it can work. Color was never an issue for me as a child overseas. It only became an issue in my own country. And so knowing what can work and seeing the future that way is what I want to see my own country in. It's sort of like, you go to a ghetto or someplace and you see these young kids and you think, oh my God, this child has no future. You can predict pretty much where that kid's going to end up. Of course, there always is the exception.
Yeah, it's probability though.
Yeah, but and it's based upon experience and history. So I knew it could work. Unfortunately, many of my peers, didn't think so. People need to stay with their own kind, that kind of thing. So I want to bring that knowledge and experience that I've had and open people's eyes. My travel does not make me make me better than anybody else by any means. I'm not. It just gives me a broader perspective because I've seen things that other people have not.
Right, and it's a tool in your toolkit to help teach others and show others, this is, you need to just broaden a perspective potentially. Exactly. I guess I think why I'm curious to this point, just to kind of like reiterate how you obviously see this works for you. This has been your approach your whole life. Because I think a lot of the tension, I've watched your documentary, Accidental Courtesy, and I think a lot of the tension is people. There's certain activists or certain people specifically within the Black community that look at what you do and they say, wow, that's crazy. I could never imagine doing that. And there's a tension there because I think to them, they see your work as like a prescription as to like what, like you're almost like preaching, like this is how it needs to be done. So do you view like your kind of method of relationship building toward de-radicalization as like the kind of like best way moving forward here? Or do you think that it's like one tool within a toolbox where there's kind of like, people over here that are raising awareness on like systemic racism and trying to like, I don't want to say mock, but like in some cases it is mock, but to kind of like criticize and break down white supremacy very publicly and kind of get it out of the public square. That's a lot of activist strategies to kind of like, we aren't going to tolerate this publicly. We don't even want to make it a debate. Whereas like what you do is much more private. It's much more one-on-one. So like, do you think, like, let's just imagine it for a second. Let's imagine you have like 1,000 mini Daryl Davises, right? Like these are people that you trust, you've taught them, you've encouraged, inspired them over the course of years. They are ready to go out and do your bidding. Is this something that you view as a potential large-scale solution to the problem of extremism? Or do you think that, again, what you do is kind of one tool in a broader toolbox?
I am one tool in a broader toolbox, but a lot of people may not see me that way. And, you mentioned if there were a million mini Daryl Davises out there running around, and this one Daryl Davis had been the impetus for 200 white supremacists to renounce. Well, 200 times 1 million is 200 million.
Right.
So
so that thought experiment would work, right?
Right. Yeah. So, but here's what I believe. Okay. Anytime somebody, I realize what I do is not the status quo. It is for me, but it's not for everybody else, and I get that. All right. anytime you do something that is novel, that is new, there's always going to be pushback and rejection. You look at Copernicus, the astronomer. What did he say? He said that the sun revolves around the earth. Now, we being earthlings, being narcissistic and thinking we are the center of the universe, for years, decades, people believed that the sun revolves around the earth. He said, no, the earth revolves around the sun. And they called him a heretic. And they locked him up because they thought he was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
People thought their world was flat. Columbus, who I don't have any respect for, thought the world was round. And he was right. But people thought he was crazy. He was going to sail his ship and fall off the edge. All right. So, some black guy going to a Klan rally or going to white supremacist meetings and things like that. This guy's a nut. He's a nutcase. He's in bed with the enemy, all that kind of stuff. I get it. I'm not the status quo. Well, guess what? The status quo hasn't worked. So maybe it's time to start thinking outside of the box. Now, when I said that I am one tool in a toolbox, as you referred to it, racism is multifaceted. There's the individual racism, there's systemic, institutionalized racism, ignorant racism where people don't even know they're racist,
Right.
things like that. All right, so it has to be addressed from a multifaceted standpoint. I'm just one facet. And what I like to compare it to is this. If, for example, let's say you have these neighbors next door to your house, and you hear the husband and wife fighting, and it's getting pretty loud, and pots and pans are flying. You call the police, and usually 2 cops are going to show up, and they're going to knock on the front door. They're going to go in. One cop is going to take the one person to the kitchen, and the other cop take the other person
Right.
to the bedroom, and they get their stories separately, and then they compare them, and then they tell them, hey, you all got to calm down, because if we have to come back, one of you or both of you are going to get locked up.
Right.
All right. And that's that. But now let's say that you were aware that your next door neighbor, the husband came home, he's crazed, maybe he lost his job, something happened, economy crashed, he lost all his money, he's gone crazy, now he's holding his wife and kids hostage. And we've seen that before many times. And more times than we care to count, the husband kills his wife and kids and then turns the gun on himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you're aware of this, you call the police this time. It's not just those 2 cops who came the first time. They'll be there in uniform with their bullhorn. They won't be knocking on the front door, though. They'll be
Right.
standing back telling the guy to come out and let somebody go, blah, blah, blah. So it'll be those 2. And then there'll be another part of the police department that shows up called the SWAT team. And they're going to surround the house. They're going to be at your front door. They're going to be at your back door. They're going to be peeping in the side window to your house. They might even drop down from a helicopter on your roof. They got the house surrounded. And then there's another part of the police department that comes. And that's the guy who calls you on the phone and tries to assure you, hey, we can get you some help. Everything's going to be cool. Just let one of your kids go. The hostage negotiator, right? He's trying to talk you down.
Mm-hmm.
So you got all these different facets working for the same goal. The goal is to free those hostages without any harm coming to them. If the negotiator, says, hey, he's responding to me, everybody else kind of, holds back and let him do his thing. If the 2 cops with the bullhorn, the guy's cooperating, he's sending people out, everybody defers to them. If one of the guys on the SWAT team says, hey, I got a bullseye on his forehead, I can take him out without hitting one of the kids or the wife, they give him the green light, and boom, that guy is gone, done. Over.
Right.
Okay, so you got these different people who are trained in different solutions, and they all are coordinating with one another because they have that common goal in mind. That's what needs to be done. I do what I do, and I do what I do very well. Others do what they do very well, and others do what they do very well. But the problem is, a lot of these others, so to speak, don't coordinate and cooperate with each other. Sometimes different law enforcement agencies out, not talk about the same police department, SWAT team, and individuals within that department, talk about different departments. They compete with one another and they don't share information. and they're defeating the purpose, the overall purpose. We need more cooperation and coordination, because each one of those people who specialize in what they do, whether it's systemic racism, institutionalized racism, dealing with individuals, whatever, we all are looking for the same goal. Let's all cooperate, share information, and get the job done. Okay, that could have been done. It should have been done years ago, decades ago. It definitely could have been done last Wednesday. Where I'm sitting right now is 25 minutes from the U.S. Capitol.
Mm.
There is no reason whatsoever what happened last Wednesday should have happened.
Do you feel it's such a, like when we talk about race relations, systemic racism, white supremacy, all these issues, it's such a visceral thing. And like you're saying, I mean, depending on the context of a situation, these things are going to be handled differently. I know like you've been to plenty of white supremacist or extremist type rallies over the years, and like you've seen the clashes between the protesters, the counter protesters, the violence that ensues when these things boil up to a moment like that. I mean, there's no more conversation. Now we've reached the point of violence. So like there has to be some, unfortunately, some form of political violence within that to maintain, you know, safety for one another, like to continue to squash and push down, push back the ideologies of Nazism, white supremacy, and so on. So I totally hear what you're saying, and that makes sense. But it's like, I guess the difficult part for me is like, how do we get to a place like after that dust settles? Because we know, just like with this riot at the Capitol, like we know that every, you know, whether it's every couple months, every couple years, like there's these big moments culturally where just it feels like this bubbles back up. Just like with George Floyd, you know, there's like a moment where everything kind of comes back to the surface, and then things are in that moment far too tense to have, or it seems to be far too tense to have these cordial conversations. I mean, like when things do die down a bit and we can like take a step back from just the emotional, visceral, like load in of these subjects and these moments and these people's lives, like how do we have those conversations, even just among ourselves, like the conversations you had with the Black Lives Matter activists? Like how do we continue to have those conversations, even like so we're not waiting until it to kind of bubble up every,
Exactly,
you know?
because we need to lift the taboo off of those conversations. I mean, you know the old phrase, you know, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. You know, that may apply in some cases, but not in all cases. You know, we need to have those conversations in times of peace, not just when, you know, some racial incident or George Floyd or the U.S. Capitol kind of, you know, event happens and then we try to address it. That's
Mm-hmm.
being reactive instead of proactive. We need to have those conversations during times when things are, you know, are calm. No Black people are getting shot, and there are no white supremacist rallies happening. That's when we have those conversations, so we are prepared in advance when they do bubble up. It's like, I'll give you an example. Like I said, I'm 62. When I was a kid, we didn't have middle school. We had what was called junior high school. And when I was in junior high school, back in the early 1970s, sex education was being introduced. Oh my goodness, things hit the roof. Parents were going crazy, man. You know, parents didn't want their kids, you know, learning about that stuff in school, and they weren't teaching it at home. So guess what? You know, you're not allowing teachers to teach it. You're not teaching your kids it yourself at home. You think your kids are not going to learn it?
Of
You're
course.
wrong.
Yeah,
They're going
yeah.
to learn it. They're going to learn it out there on the street. And next thing you know, you're going to be a grandparent. So, you know, before your time, all because you avoided addressing the issue.
Yep, being
So
reactive.
exactly. And so when sex ed was being introduced, and I remember it, if you wanted your kid to take it, you had to send a note to school, and then your kid with other parents' kids who had permission to take it were taken to a certain class, and you learned about it. All right. Today, sex education is a part of the regular curriculum. Kids learn it. You know, it's part of regular. So as a result, kids today are better informed about family planning, contraception, STDs, etc. And information is power. They can, you know, they can make better decisions today than they could have made back when I was that age. So because now today the taboo has been lifted off of the topic of sex ed. The taboo, the same taboo, needs to be lifted off the topic of race discussions. We need to start bringing that up early in schools. And so kids can, as young kids, they can sponge in that information rather than try to wait until they get, into adulthood and then try to change their minds after they've been saturated with something that they believe. Because let me tell you something. Here's a mistake that we often make, all of us. We try to change somebody's reality. You cannot change somebody's reality. One's perspective is one's reality. Whether that reality is real or not doesn't matter. It's their reality. If it's their perspective, it's real to them, and that goes for kids, adults alike. For example, let's take you take a 7 or 8-year-old kid to see David Copperfield or somebody, some magician, and he puts a lady in this long box, stretches her out, puts her in the box, and then he saws the box in half and puts half the box on stage right, other half on stage left. Her feet are sticking out that box and her head sticking out this box. To that kid, that magician cut that lady in half. I see her feet over there and her head's over there. And then he brings the two halves back together, opens the box, and out she steps all in one piece. That kid believes somehow this guy did that. That's his perspective. Therefore, it becomes his reality and you can't tell him any different because he saw it. It's real to him. All right. Until you offer him different perspectives as to what could have happened, and he latches on to one of them, then he or she will change their own reality. So if you want somebody's reality to change, don't go after their reality. You'll never do it. Offer them alternative perspectives. And when they see one of your perspectives and it makes sense, they will change their own reality. And that's what I've been doing. That is the key to my success. Now, one thing that we haven't talked about and that the media does not talk about, that is at the root cause of all of the stuff that we're talking about right now, and it's getting worse and it's going to get worse, is the fact that people feel their identity is being erased. I'm talking about, in particular, white people. You know the term white flight? Of
course, yeah.
Okay. White flight no longer exists. It no longer exists. It used to exist. People had an all-white neighborhood, and all of a sudden one black guy moved in, one Hispanic moved in, blah, blah, blah. And then they all start moving out. They fly somewhere else to another all-white neighborhood. They can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Now, everywhere they go, there's somebody already there that doesn't look like them. So the color of the landscape has changed that much. It has eradicated that thing called white flight. And what people in the Klan and the neo-Nazis and alt-right tell me, they say, Daryl, I don't want my grandkids to be brown. They call it the browning of America, or white genocide through miscegenation. All right. So they're concerned about their identity being erased. And then, that's why we see all these groups popping up, new groups. The Klan was the original group. And out of the Klan, you get these neo-Nazis, you get the Proud Boys, you get this, you get that. And they all are recruiting. Come join us. We're going to take our country back. We're going to make America great again. We're going to build that wall. We're going to send those people back to where they came from. On and on and on. Right. And people go and join these groups. And then when the group fails to take our country back or whatever they promised to do, some of these people get frustrated. And they say, you know what? If the Klan can't do it, or the neo-Nazis can't do it, I'll do it myself.
Right.
And that's when they go rogue, right? And these individuals will go into a black church and shoot up 9 black people practicing Bible study or something, go into the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, waste 11 Jews, or go to the Walmart in El Paso and shoot up the Mexican people, go to the Oak Creek Temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, shoot up the Sikh Indian people. These are called lone wolves. And we have plenty of intelligence agencies with operatives who can fit the role and go join these groups undercover and gather information, gather intelligence, report it back, and foil some of these plots. Just like we had people in that militia that was going to kidnap the governor of Michigan, and they were able to gather that intelligence in advance, right? Who knows what would have happened if they weren't in that group, right? So we have the ability to infiltrate a group. It is impossible to infiltrate a lone wolf. And here's the problem. It's not a problem, but here's the situation. This country has always been a white majority. This country was built on white supremacy and slavery. And as we progressed over the decades, we progressed like this, maybe like this, but never like this on even keel, right? 21 years from now, in the year 2042, that's the marker. This country, for the first time in history, will be 50-50.
No more white majority.
Yeah, 50-50 even, white and non-white. Non-white meaning Black, Hispanic, Asian, etc. All right. Between 2045 and 2050, white people in this country will become a minority. And there are plenty of white people who accept that. They have no qualms about, hey, that's cool. It's evolution, what happens. I don't have a problem with it. But there is a large percentage that is freaked out by this. And, they've been in power for so long, they don't want to give up that throne. So they're freaking out. That's why they're wanting to join these groups and acting rogue and going off on their own and doing these things. They don't want to lose that power. We're seeing that from one particular individual right now who lives in a house about 25 minutes from me on Pennsylvania Avenue. All right. So, this is a problem for them. They think their world, in their mind, their world is literally coming to an end.
Right.
And as we get closer and closer to 2042, we're going to see more and more of those lone wolves. Okay. It's just like as certain people are getting closer and closer to inauguration, we're seeing people try to change something because they're afraid of losing that power. That's the parallel. And if you remember back in 1999, you're a young guy. You're probably a kid in 99, right?
Yeah, I was 8 years old.
Well, in 1999, a lot of people were like freaking out about the year 2000.
Mm-hmm.
They thought the world was going to end.
I remember we hid in like a shelter. I thought it was all going down. Yeah,
exactly. People were like, man, the world's going to blow up. My VCR was
the grid's going down.
Yeah, and people were literally taking all their money out of the banks and hiding it in their house, burying it in their backyard because they thought the bank's computers couldn't keep up with the year change and lose their money. They called it Y2K, and Y2K was the end of the world. Well, 2042 is the white supremacist Y2K. They're freaking out about that, and this is why we have to address this now. This is why conversations are needed in advance, so people get a sense. Hey, the world is not going to blow up. It's not going to be as bad as you think it is. This is not going to be a communist country in 2042 or whatever. You're still going to have an identity. You're still going to have a voice. You're not going to be erased.
So I was really excited to get into this with you because you nailed it, and this is the kind of biggest problem that I see erupting from extremism is this sort of white identitarian, white nationalist movement that's just growing in just disturbing rates of popularity online that I see. And I was wondering, leading up to this conversation, just does your strategy differentiate at all when you deal with people like a Richard Spencer, or I'm not sure if you're familiar with him, Nick Fuentes?
I had dinner with Richard Spencer.
Wow.
I've had dinner with Jason Kessler. I've had Matt Heimbach in my house.
Do you know who Nick Fuentes is by any chance?
Pardon me?
Nick Fuentes, you heard of him?
Yeah, I know who he is. I don't know him personally.
So real quick before we go any further on this, like when you look at those types of folks, like these guys who are educated and they don't fit the same markers as your kind of origin story, where you're talking like we've got these KKK members who might be in Alabama who have never seen or never talked to a black person before.
Right.
These are people who are highly educated. They're ideologically motivated in a way where they'll be pulling up American history, like the Hart-Celler Act, and about, the United States let in this mass immigration to, like you said, the browning of America. And they're just uber concerned about multiculturalism and the kind of the diminishing of white culture in a way, like you're saying. So when you talk to these people, knowing that they're a lot more, on average, let's just say, slick, they're a lot more aware of a lot of your talking points, like the stuff that you would normally bring up. How do you manage those conversations?
I manage them very well because I'm educated myself. So
Well, I
but
know
yeah,
you manage it well, but is the strategy different? You know what I mean? Like, do you approach it any differently than you would
yeah,
have
you
approached?
got to go to where somebody's at.
Right,
I mean, you can't squeeze blood out of a turnip, right? So if you're dealing with somebody who's a third grade dropout, you can't be giving that person a college argument.
right,
They just can't grasp it. So you have to go where they're at, and so therefore you modify the conversation. Um, some of these people are power hungry. They're narcissistic. They want to be in command. They want to be in charge. They exploit their own. Uh, you look at somebody like a David Duke or Richard Spencer. Some of these people who are well educated, and they know that half the stuff they're saying is bull.
right,
But as long as people believe them, it elevates them. It puts them where they think they should be. In that ego, that narcissistic realm. That what's it called? NPD, narcissistic personality disorder,
yeah,
things like that. And there are Black people who do the same thing, who are in leadership roles. People like power, and if they can figure out a way to gain that, to gain followers, then that's what they do. Some of them actually believe what they're saying, sure, or believe a part of it. Others, it's a means by which I can rise, I can climb the ladder.
right,
And I've seen people go both ways. David Duke started off being a neo-Nazi before he became a Klan leader. And then after he became a Klan leader, he formed the NAAWP, National Association for the Advancement of White People. And now he has some organization called Euro, European
oh
United.
yeah, it's like yeah, the spelling's weird.
So I
I've
mean,
heard
he
of it.
keeps rebranding and recreating himself wherever he can be on top.
Right,
All right. So we see a lot of that, and that comes from people who are well educated. They know what brands work, what brands don't work. For example, the term white supremacy. Um, that's what everybody referred to it as in the very beginning. I'm a white supremacist. I believe in white supremacy. All right. And so, yeah, I believe in that too. Sign me up. So it blew up super big, a lot of membership, all that kind of stuff in the Klan or whatever organization it was. And then, of course, the more people you have, the more risk there is for violence and somebody going to, do something that's going to bring shame and trouble to the larger organization.
mm-hmm.
So it got to the point of being so violent that Congress passed an act in 1871 called the Ku Klux Klan Acts of 1871. And those acts are what we use today to go to court against police brutality. It came from those acts. Anyway, so that drove the Klan underground. When they were reborn in 1915 after Birth of a Nation, the movie, they they changed the rules of the Klan, so forth and so on. As membership expanded, it got big again. People began committing acts of hate and violence and murder. So they had to rebrand.
Right,
So now they went from calling themselves white supremacists, because that term carried a lot of baggage with it: lynchings, bombings, floggings, all kinds of stuff. So people, while they believed in white supremacy, they morally, some of them didn't believe in taking somebody's life. So they began dropping out. They didn't want to go to jail or whatever. So membership dwindled. So they rebranded. I'm a white separatist. I don't hate Black people or Jewish people. I just love my own race. Blacks should be able to have their own schools, their own neighborhoods, their own swimming pool. We should be able to have ours. That kind of thing. Yeah, I can go along with that. Sign me up. So then membership increased again. And with the increase, here comes the violence. And so now white supremacy and white separatism became unpalatable on the tongue because it carried a lot of baggage. Membership went down again. So they had to rebrand again. And they chose the word nationalist. I'm a white nationalist. Well, what's a nationalist? Somebody who's proud of their country. And you happen to be white, so you're a white nationalist. Oh yeah, well I'm part of my country and I'm white. Yeah, sign me up.
right, right.
So it just keeps changing, and then from white nationalists it went to alt right. Uh, Listen, to use an old cliche, A rose by any other name is what? Still a rose.
Mm-hmm.
So white nationalists, white separatists, white supremacists, whatever, alt-right, it's all based on supremacy.
Right.
It's just a rebranding. And if you're a nationalist, I mean, I'm a nationalist, you're a nationalist. We love our country. Why do we have to say white nationalist or black nationalist? Why can't we just say I'm a nationalist?
Well, like you're saying, it's this language game that just like
Right, exactly.
it's literal it's literal political correctness in a way where it's like they know the like you're saying the terms, their language isn't palatable, so they're constantly having to shift the goalposts. And I notice this a lot in the language of white supremacists, nationalists, whatever you want to call them, online when they talk about ethno-states. Because like you're saying, like this whole idea that we just want America to be like a white ethno-state, but we don't want to be violent about it. We just want to like pay black and brown people to move to other countries. Like it wouldn't have to be violent. And then you like just ask one question and you're like, okay, well, what happens when they refuse to move? And it's like, then it's violent. And it's just like there's never been a peacefully enforced ethno-state.
The peaceful transition of power, right?
Yeah. It's just this like it's so. But you're right. Like just the framing of it, like just being able to say like white nationalists, like to a lot of people, and we see this all the time, especially with kids, like impressionable, angsty teenage kids, where they hear a lot of this language and they're so susceptible to it. Like they don't understand like what they're kind of taking in, to their worldview as it's coming through, because they hear these things like, oh yeah, I'm white, I live in a white community. Like what's wrong with having an ethno-state? Like they're not thinking about it in terms of like we're saying like logic, and like the logical ends to these things.
What would you think, if and you asked me to say a few words about myself, when you introduced me, you said, hey, just give me some background.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, what would you think if I said, well, okay, I'm a black musician. What does that have to do with playing music?
Right.
Or some white guy comes on and says, well, I'm a white musician. So what? It's great that you're a musician, but what does the color have to do with it?
Right.
Okay, so you're a nationalist, but why do you have to say I'm a white nationalist or black nationalist?
Yeah, it's such a this might be a little bit of a rabbit trail. We don't have to spend a lot of time going down here, but I'm interested too to get a little bit of your thoughts on the sort of it's framed as identity politics and culture and media. I don't like that term because it's so amorphous and people mean different things when they say it, but it is this kind of this idea of like on the right, which is like the white nationalist side, these are people that are highly focused on identity. It's the most important thing to their worldview, to their idea. And I see this a lot with people like a Richard Spencer, who he'll say oftentimes, like when he's engaging with like Black Lives Matter or similar activists on the ground, like we'll be like, well, no, I like that you guys are so focused on your identity because that's exactly what I care about. And it becomes this like weird manipulative game where like when you and I have a conversation about race, we can acknowledge the difference between the history, of African Americans in the US and how their identity was essentially stripped, for hundreds of years and their culture stripped. So there has to be this kind of, building back of that, like what it means to be black in America versus whiteness in America, being the kind of the default, the supremacy, the top of the hierarchy. But the way that these identitarians on the right often frame these conversations is they try to like rope people like from the left to kind of create like a false equivocation in a way. And you and I both know that's in bad faith, and there's no like equal.
A lot of times it is in bad faith, and I can tell you that. Yeah, there is some manipulation going on there, but black supremacists and white supremacists get along fantastic.
Well, that's what I was going to get at. I mean, you and I both know that black nationalists exist, black separatists exist, and it is this kind of strange. So, like for a white person in my shoes, it is a strange conversation to navigate online because we do see it's in similar ways to how white nationalist rhetoric kind of like it's almost like a pipeline. Like you start to see slow like inklings of language and what people are talking about. Like they start talking about immigration and you kind of get this feeling, and then it eventually kind of
find common ground.
Yeah. And then
both agree upon.
And then it snowballs.
White supremacists and Nation of Islam.
Exactly.
They both dislike the Jewish people. All right. So they find that commonality and agree upon that. But you also have to be aware that the enemy of your enemy is not your best friend.
Right. So so I guess my question is like, how do you navigate that space? Because like, again, you and I having this conversation, we know the importance of identity. You brought it up yourself here, just like how we can't deny people's experience. And if we're talking to a white nationalist, we have to find ways to integrate, or not integrate, to kind of infiltrate, their ideology in a way that they understand, on the identity level. And in a similar way, on like in what is kind of like broadly understood as the left, quote unquote, politically, you also see a lot of these identitarian movements within Black nationalists and Black separatists that are becoming a little bit more, I would say, to a disturbing degree, like culturally normalized, where you're seeing a lot of activists kind of pushing for like separatist ideas that are kind of just seen like they're under the guise of like, this is, we believe in social justice, and this is all in the name of, kind of like reclaiming, Black culture in the U.S. or whatever it might be. But it is a kind of strange thing how you see like the parallels between Black separatists that might identify on the left and then white separatists who identify on the right. And I don't know, like, it's hard for me, I guess, because I understand, like, again, the importance of identity. There's a component there that we can't deny within our culture. Like, I don't take the argument of like being colorblind as a solution to racism, because we know race, even if it is a cultural construct, it exists and it impacts
Right.
people's lived experiences. So we have to take that into account when we're dealing with specific issues. But how do you like deal with that language when it does kind of interplay between those groups?
It is a social construct, a man-made social construct within our country. There are other countries in which it is not a construct. There's only one race, the human race. And this is what a lot of Americans don't realize, because most Americans do not travel. Right? Europeans travel all the time. They're all
Right.
over the place. 50% or more of Americans don't even have passports. Their vacation extends to going to the beach, something like that. Or if they live at the beach, they go to the city, that kind of thing.
Right.
They don't go to Europe and South America and here and there and Africa and wherever else. Europeans do all that stuff. They have a broader sense of worldliness. It does not make anybody a better person. It just gives them a better and broader perspective. Back in the 1940s and 50s, many Black Americans moved to France, moved to Paris. Josephine Baker, Eartha Kitt, a lot of these people moved there because they were treated as equals. The French people did not see us as Black people. They just saw us for what we were, whatever we contributed as human beings. And a lot of white people in this country don't realize that. And those white people over there are a hell of a lot more white than white Americans.
Right. It's like you always hear that white nationalist trope. Well, they'll use a term like white European, and it's like no one in Europe considers themselves white. Like they consider themselves the ethnicity of their country. It's
exactly.
Like they don't see themselves as one unit.
Right. Exactly. And that's why you haven't heard me use the term African American. I keep using the term Black. And some people get offended. People who look like me get offended because I do that. Listen, I lived in Africa for 10 years. Every American is an African American if you really want to get down to it. You're
Right.
an African American
Right.
for that matter. If you go back far enough. To me, an African American is someone who came here, last year or something, and became naturalized as an American. But when you've been here for 402 years, as I have, because we first came here, in 1619 as slaves, so 402 years ago, I'm an American. My origins are Africa, just like everybody else's. Every human being's origin is Africa, until you find an older fossil that was found in China or something, then we'd all be Chinese Americans,
Right.
or whatever. But either an African American is someone who just came here last year and got naturalized, or we all are African Americans. And it's really a misnomer, because a lot of American people cannot tell the difference between somebody walking down the street who may be from Nigeria and somebody who may be from Harlem, New York.
Right.
So if some Black person were to snatch some lady's purse and run down the street, and the cops, well, what do you look like? And then she says, well, he was an African American, wearing a white T-shirt and blue jeans. She doesn't know whether he's from Nigeria or he's from right there.
Right.
So again, it's a misnomer, and a lot of that is our fault. We're trying to identify with something because our culture, as you mentioned earlier, was stripped away from us. Yes, we all come from Africa. Yes, that's obvious. But for me, I'm an American first. And if you have to identify me because I did something, then you can say I'm Black, I'm brown, I'm whatever. I'm from Africa, but that was 402 years ago. I lived there for 10 years, in my lifetime. So we also are at fault for changing how we want to be identified every 10 or 15 years. It used to be colored, Negro, Afro-American, Black, and now African-American or person of color.
So again, this kind of comes back to your general ethos of how you view human beings. Like I notice this a lot in your interviews and just how you talk about people is that you constantly try to use language that's as unifying as possible. Like we are all Americans, we are all human beings. And it's interesting because obviously the conversation we're having right now is a tale as old as time. This problem of racism at all levels has been going on specifically in America since its inception. So when we think about like the civil rights era, right? So we have like the sort of, this is again, pardon me for like trying to dumb this down as much as I can, but like you have this sort of like Martin Luther King Jr. style approach, which is, I think, I would say similar to your approach, which is just like we got to all come together, speaking as one race, like in some way. And then you have the sort of other side of that coin, which is like the Malcolm X side, which is just much more like, focusing on like Black power and Black identity. This is kind of like a common thread that we're running through in this conversation, is that there's two different ways of looking at solutions to these problems. And we see this in activist circles today. We saw it in activist circles then. Do you view, just like we said earlier, like in your kind of your approach to de-radicalization in general, how you see it as one tool in a toolbox, there's multiple things we have to be doing at once. Do you view your sort of rhetoric, which is just this, like, we're all Americans, we have to all kind of come together despite our differences, do you view that type of rhetoric, that type of approach when it comes to race relations as the superior prescriptive approach that you would prefer everyone else to engage in? Or again, do you think there's a place for that other side that focuses not solely on identity? Again, not speaking of like Black nationalists, Black separatists necessarily, but just like the people who do emphasize identity within Black culture to the degree, like that we're pointing out issues at a kind of elevated level. So like there's like those two kind of approaches where there's people that are like, we ought to focus on race as it pertains to issues within systemic racism, like disproportionate police violence toward Black people, disproportionate levels of poverty, poor levels of education, and so on. That's like a rhetorical strategy that people use, or they'll specifically use language like Black people are affected more in this way. Like, let's focus on not seeing color. You know what I mean? Like, we want to focus on race. We want people to see the differences between these two races in these specific scenarios, versus what you're saying, which is a much more like it's a much more like we're all Americans, like let's try to focus in on like our common humanity and all that. Like, this is again trying to dumb it down, just speaking broadly, rhetorically. So
I believe in both. Okay, where transgressions have been made against certain people, whether they're Jewish, whether they're Black, whether they're gay, whether they're whatever, that has to be identified,
right?
Because that is wrong. And those things, and it's part of our history, it's part of our fabric. It's a shameful part of our history, but everything needs to be laid out: the good, the bad, the ugly, and the shameful. And so, yes, those things do have to be identified. Slavery was wrong. We need to learn about that. We need to talk about it. The police violence that continues today is wrong. That should definitely be talked about. But at the same time, we do need to come together as one and understand, that we all are human beings. We all bleed the same. And these things that are happening to certain groups of people is not it's the norm here, but it's not the world norm
Right.
in all different countries. I mean, sure, there are other countries where people are killing each other every day, with ISIS and this, that, and the other. That's wartime. But in most countries that are having a civil life, that's not an issue. And we criticize countries like, say, Ireland, where Catholics and Protestants, are bombing one another. And we don't have that problem over here. We don't understand. I mean, I don't know if you're Catholic or Protestant. It doesn't matter to me, whether I'm one or the other either. But over there, it does. And so we don't quite understand that. And so therefore, we're hypocritical because we're doing the exact same thing. So we have to come together as one. But there's nothing wrong with establishing your identity, your heritage, and having it recognized and not taken away from you and erased and being stripped down and being lied about. Now, while I say that I want to see people's heritage and identity, be put out there, not above or below somebody else's, but be put out there equally. While I feel it's important, at the same time, I will say something else that might surprise you, but I've been saying this now for 23 years. I think that we need to get rid of Black History Month. And I'll tell you why. There was a time that there was no history being taught no Black history being taught in this country. What was being taught was called American history. And for all practical purposes, it may as well have been called white history.
Of course.
Because, white people were being given credit for places they did not discover and for things they did not invent. And so that's what I'm talking about. That's where identity needs to come forward. It wasn't, Admiral Byrd who discovered the North Pole. It was Matthew Henson, his black best friend. And he even told the people that. But they said, no, the credit has to go to you.
Yeah, it's not going in the book.
Yeah, exactly. And Admiral Byrd was in the book until the 80s when Reagan was in office. He was petitioned, so forth and so on. And Admiral Byrd was buried in Arlington Cemetery. His best friend, Admiral Byrd got sick on the way to the North Pole. He told his best friend and colleague who went with him, you go ahead on. It was Matthew Henson, this Black guy, who went on and discovered the North Pole. And of course, when they returned, they gave the credit to Byrd, who said, no, it's him. They would not do it. Byrd was buried in Arlington Cemetery. Matthew Henson was buried in a pauper's grave. All right. In the 80s, that changed. They petitioned and they got it changed. And now Henson is in the book, and Henson was exhumed, and he's buried next to his best friend in Arlington Cemetery. It took that long. All right. So these are things, yes, that we need to know and put out there as identity. But why do we need to change Black History Month? Okay. Well, let's talk about how it was created. We didn't have that being taught when I was a kid. I knew it because my parents told me. All right. So a fellow named Carter G. Woodson struggled to get Black history taught. We finally got 1 week. It was called Negro History Week. Every year, 1 week. We fought harder. We finally got 1 month, the shortest month of the year, right? February, 28 days.
Right.
Okay. No consequence there, right? So, but we accepted February for 2 reasons. One, well, because it was the birth month of 2 of our heroes. One, Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves, and Frederick Douglass, born in February. So we accepted it. And if we didn't accept it, we would have nothing, right? So anyway, we accepted it, and then unfortunately, we became complacent. Now we stopped fighting. We needed February. A lot of people who would not know a lot of Black history were now learning it. But here's the problem. At the time, it was good, and it was good for a long time. But it's at this point now that Black History Month has become detrimental. And let me explain that to you. Every February, kids learn about the same half a dozen Black people: Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, Malcolm X, and maybe one or two other ones.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time they get through half a dozen, our month is over. We did our black thing. Let's move on.
Right.
And that history never gets reinforced throughout the year. It only comes back up again the following February. But we study Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Graham Bell, Eli Whitney, Thomas Edison, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Francis Scott Key, all year long. It's always being reinforced throughout the whole school year. Nobody ever forgets who flew the kite and the lightning hit the key. We all know it's Ben Franklin. But you ask some kid in June, right before he's getting ready to get out of school for the summer, who was Harriet Tubman? Oh, yeah. I remember her. She was that black lady who refused to give up her seat on the bus.
No.
Yeah. Because there's no reinforcement since February.
Yes.
And people forget. And then the next February is the same half a dozen black people. All right. So now, don't get me wrong. I don't want your listeners to get me wrong. I am not taking anything away from those black people I just named. They are some of the greatest black icons out there in our history. But guess what? There are tons more. What about the guy who invented the traffic light, the gas mask, the ironing board, and many other things? Oh, well, we didn't have time. We only had 28 days. So what's happening is this: year after year after year after year, decade after decade, those same half dozen black people are being fed to us. So we're subliminally brainwashing little black kids and little white kids into believing there was only a half a dozen black people in this country who ever did anything, and those are them.
And that it's only important enough to learn 1 month out of the year. That's what you're saying?
Exactly. So my solution is this: we get rid of Black History Month, and we take that history and put it where it belongs, under the umbrella of American history.
The curriculum,
studied, the curriculum throughout the year, just like anybody else. Women's History Month is March. And women do not stop being women after March any more than I stopped being black after February. So we need to get rid of their month too.
I work in advertising, so let me just say I'm a fan of how you baited in with that, because I kind of knew where you were going. Like I knew that your solution was going to be integrating black culture within the curriculum, but the way you set that up, you know what? Let's just nuke Black History Month. That's a very it gets people to sit up in their chairs like, what's this guy? What's he talking about?
Because think about it this way: Obama, right, the first black president. What are we going to do with him? Just stick him in the black box and only talk about him in February, which is part of Black history? We don't talk about him in September? How crazy is that?
Right.
Now, listen, back when I was a kid, we had and we still have, we had the Miss America beauty pageant. Back then, all the judges were white males. Black girls were not allowed to compete in Miss America. They were not deemed beautiful, and they didn't want white men judging on the beauty of a black woman parading on the stage. And back then, there were only like two categories: the evening gown and the swimsuit. So women were being objectified. Women didn't have talent; they didn't have to write essays or do anything, talent-wise. They're just being looked at and judged. All right. So black women who were discriminated against because they were considered ugly and could not compete as Miss America, they were getting low self-esteem because they were not considered beautiful. So what did we do in order to elevate their esteem? We created the Miss Black America beauty pageant to give Black girls something to which they could aspire, right? And that worked. That brought them up. And then finally, the main Miss America, the big one, it opened its doors to any American female, regardless of their ethnicity or race or whatever. They could compete as long as they were American. And since that time, we've had several Miss Americas who've been Black, starting with Vanessa Williams and then Debbie Turner and I forgot the other girls' names. But so now that Miss America has come into the real mainstream, being inclusive, we no longer need Miss Black America.
Right.
When are we no longer going to need Black History Month? We are in the 21st century. What's up with that?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, this I'm just kind of like I'm building, you know, a like your character. Like we have this conversation, like I'm understanding more and more of like how you think these issues through, and it's fascinating because I agree with you in principle on that, and at the same time, maybe not with Black History Month as an example, but you would agree that there are certain areas, you know, within the Black community, Black culture in the U.S. where we still do need to elevate, you know, whether it's Black people in like a certain industry or a certain, it's like I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but like let's just say a certain subject because of the white supremacist sort of structure of our country. You know, being like you're saying, and I get what you're saying. You know, obviously we've come a long way. Let's say since like the civil rights
we still
movement,
have a long way to go.
we have a long way to go. And like when we look, you know, whether it's, you know, the Fortune 500 CEOs, you know, whether we look at, you know, the people in the face of our media and that run our institutions, like obviously it's still a predominantly white run culture. So I mean, there's certain
white male run culture.
Right, exactly. So like we know there's certain points of entry and certain areas within our institutions where, you know, Black people are at like an inherent disadvantage from the jump. Just again, you and I, you're an intelligent person. You know, I'm speaking on average. You know, just kind of proportionally. Not everybody, but so that said, I mean, like you would still say that there's certain areas, there's certain whether you know maybe not the Miss USA pageant, but like you know say some other areas where. Like the most common example we hear about is affirmative action. Obviously, that's like the common one. But there's other areas where we need to continually elevate Black people, not in like a separatist way per se, but just in like an additional way to kind of compensate for the, you know, being their starting point being so far behind, like within our white dominated institutions. You'd agree with that, right?
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
Okay.
And you know, in terms of affirmative action and things like that, I don't believe in lowering the bar for anybody. I believe in raising the bar and keep on raising it and force people to stretch to reach that bar, to elevate themselves. And yes, and there are, you know, certain restrictions on certain people. Like back, you know, when quotas became popular, the and affirmative action, the person who was at the most advantage for minorities, who would always get the job, was a Black woman, because you know when they had to hire certain number of Blacks and certain number of women, you know, and these people were male chauvinists and racists. You know, they didn't want to hire Blacks, they didn't want to hire a woman. What did they do? They killed
Check both boxes, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, they hired a Black woman. You
Yep.
know, so that put white women out or whatever. But so you know what I believe in is affirmative education. Give everybody the opportunity to get the best education there is. Like for example, you know, when I would interview a lot of these KKK leaders and things like that, and try to find out what makes them so superior to me and supreme. I was told things like, you know, most Black people are prone to crime, and that's evidenced by the fact that there are more Blacks in prison than white people. You know, that's true. There are more Blacks in prison than white people, but they're not, and that's their reality because that's their perspective. That's what they see, but they're not considering the other perspective that Blacks are sentenced more often than white people for the same crime,
Right.
or given longer sentences. The imbalance in our judicial system. I'm told that that Black people are born with a smaller brain. White people, the larger the brain, the more capacity for intelligence.
Oh, the bell curve,
yeah.
man.
The bell curve. Yeah, Dr. Charles Murray, right?
Yeah.
Who wrote the bell curve. So yeah, exactly. And they would even tout that book around, even though they didn't read the book, because they can't read very well.
Of course they couldn't. Yeah, of course.
But they tout it around because some PhD said it, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, and the guy says, you know, that's evidenced by the fact that that Black kids year after year consistently score lower on the SATs than white kids. And again, that's true. So that's his perspective. He sees the data. Black kids always score lower than white kids. So therefore, they're not as smart as white kids. All right. But the other perspective is, which is the real one, you know, but that's his reality. The actual real reality is the fact that where do most Black kids go to school? In the inner city.
Right.
Where do most white kids go to school? In the suburbs. And I can tell you for a fact, Black kids and the inner city schools are not as good as the suburban schools. Simple as that. The Black kids or students who go to school in the suburbs, they score just as high, if not higher, than some of the white kids. And some of the white kids who go to school in the inner city score just as low, if not lower, than some of the Black kids. It has absolutely nothing to do with skin color or the size of their brain, but it has everything to do with the quality of the educational system in which they are enrolled.
Well, this is the problem with how racists use all statistics, whether it is, incarceration rates between Black and white people or the average IQ rates. I mean, they look at a statistic void of context and they say, look, on average, Black people have a lower IQ. Like, look, on average, Black people are incarcerated more. And any sociologist who would look at those statistics would tell you, okay, the first thing you ask is why. And if your answer is just, well, they're inferior, I mean, that's not really much of an analysis. I mean, you have to kind of figure out, like, okay, what are, like, we can pair these up with circumstances around the world throughout history, and it's fairly, I don't mean I mean, I do mean to demean racist people, but it seems very obvious to me, that like systemic poverty is the leading role, and then along with systemic poverty, all sorts of other institutional barriers and racist policing and zoning laws. Like there's all these, we can look back through history, everything from redlining, there's a million.
Right, that's the systemic part of it.
Of course, and so you can build up a picture for somebody and be like, hey, like, yes, like statistically on average, let's say Black people score an average of 5 points lower than white people or whatever in the IQ. The reason why that is because exactly what you brought up. I mean, education rates lower, not just education, but everything that comes along with systemic poverty, which is the lack of resources to tutors, more single parent households, more violence, less job opportunities. It's like all these things compounded, and all of a sudden that gap shrinks to nothing. And you can see this, in comparable circumstances around the world. I mean, like what poverty does to society at large. I mean, it affects everybody. Because if the more people that are poor, the more violence there is, and that has a ripple effect toward everybody. So it's really difficult to relay this to people who are seemingly unwilling to lift up that kind of veil of prejudice that holds their whole worldview together, when it's staring them right in the face with every credible study from every credible sociologist that we have that's looked at, or criminologist that's looked at this topic for the past 50, 75 years.
Let me share a true story with you that actually happened with me. I was driving around and this Klansman was in my passenger seat in my car, and we got on the topic of crime, and he made a statement which I've heard a million times since. That Black people are born with a gene that makes them violent. And so I'm driving, I'm like, what are you talking about? And he says, well, who's doing all the drive-bys and carjackings in Southeast? And he was referring to Southeast Washington, D.C., which is, D.C. has 4 quadrants: Northeast, Northwest, Southeast, and Southwest.
Mm-hmm.
Southeast is predominantly Black. There are some white people who live there, but it's predominantly Black and very high crime ridden. And he says, who's doing all the drive-bys and carjackings in Southeast? I said, okay, it's Black people. I said, but you're not considering the demographics. I said, Black people, it's what lives there. I said, who's doing all the crime in Bangor, Maine?
Right.
White people. Right. That's what lives there, right?
Right,
and
right.
He says, no, it has nothing to do with the demographics. You all have that gene. And so I'm looking at him. I'm like, look, man, I'm as Black as anybody you've ever seen. I said, I have never done a carjacking or a drive-by. How do you explain that? He didn't even think about it. He answered me like that. He said, your gene is latent, hasn't come out yet. How do you even argue with that? I mean, he had an answer for everything.
Oh, yeah.
That was so far out in left field, I couldn't even touch it.
Right.
So I'm just driving around dumbfounded. He's over here all smug, like, you see, you got nothing to say.
Got him. Yeah.
And so I thought about it. I said, okay, I got to go to where he is, because I could give him a stack of books to the ceiling by PhDs.
He's not going to care what the sociologist says.
Exactly. Precisely. So I had to go to where he is. I had to change his perspective. All right. So what I said was, well, all white people have a gene in them that make them a serial killer. And he says, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, name me 3 black serial killers. He couldn't do it.
I couldn't do it.
I said, here, I'll give you one. I named one for him, gave it to him. I said, just give me 2. He couldn't do it. I said, Charles Manson, Jeffrey Dahmer, Henry Lee Lucas, John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, David Berkowitz, son of Sam, Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, on and on. I said, son, you are a serial killer. He said, Daryl, I've never killed anybody. I said, your gene is latent, hasn't come out yet. He goes, well, that's stupid. I said, duh. And I said, you're right, it is stupid, but it's no more stupid for me to say that about you than what you said about me. And he got very, very quiet. But I could tell his brain was spinning.
Yeah, he thought about that all night.
He did. Yeah. He actually did. And then a moment later, he changed the subject. But 5 months later, he quit the Klan based on that conversation. And his Klan robe was the first robe that I got.
Wow. Oh, wow. It's amazing.
So, there you go, where, I couldn't attack his reality. That's his reality.
Right.
So what I did was I gave him some different perspectives.
That's brilliant. And I feel like in listening to you talk, I mean, that is, to me, one of the most inspirational aspects of what you do is just your ability to adapt to where people are and then literally infiltrate like their psyche and figure out, how do I mess around and actually first off understand where this person's coming from, and then mess around to actually get them to think through the nonsense they're believing, because like you said, it's not reality based. Like it's
right.
it's based in prejudice, ignorance, all that.
Don't tell them what to think. Show them how to think.
Right.
And when they arrive at the conclusion, it's a lot stronger and a lot more tenable than if you try to compel them to think a certain way. Let them come to that conclusion themselves, and it will last a lot longer. And that's a good thing about this platform on which I'm on. I'm a member of the organization and on the board of advisors and stuff, is minds.com. And it's a free speech platform. We advocate for free speech, as long as nobody's going to enact violence upon somebody
death
else.
Threats, that type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bring your ideas, regardless of how controversial they may be or whatever. Let's talk about them. Let's have some civil dialogue about it, no matter how far out, how close in it is. Because a lot of platforms will kick you off if you say the wrong thing or this, that, or the other. We're not like that. We're encouraging conversation, because I believe everybody, regardless of their station in life, has something to say. And remember what I said: people want to be heard, they want to be respected, they want to be loved, they want to be treated fairly, and they want the same things for their family as anybody else wants for somebody else's family or their own family. And Minds provides that for people. It allows them to be heard. It has respect, and it treats people fairly. And that's what people want.
Right.
And so, they can come there, they can express their beliefs, their ideas, they can get feedback. And when I say respect, you don't have to respect what somebody is saying, but respect their right to say it. Right. Without having to kick them off the platform, put them in jail, suspend their account or, whatever. Of course.
Yeah. Like the legal action. I guess here's one thing I'm curious to get your opinion on. You're familiar with QAnon, right?
Yeah.
Or it's some like loose way, right? Just for people listening, the conspiracy theory / group that believes that there's a deep state cabal within the government and the media and all around the world, really, that is creating like these mass child sex trafficking rings, and politicians and wealthy people are abducting children to feed off their blood, and Donald Trump is secretly working with the military to take these people down. And it's this whole. It originated on 4chan style message boards online, and
maybe while he's doing it, he can tell us where Elvis is hiding out.
Right. So Daryl, this is what I'm getting at here. This is what I'm getting at. So knowing, again, talking about white supremacists, white nationalists, KKK members, we have a blueprint. We know, there's one of a couple options here, right? Like the one option this person is ignorant. They haven't had certain life experiences. They've built an ideology off prejudices. So you got one strategy to approach them. This other person, here's another option. Here's a white identitarian who's like really educated, and they have all this history, and they believe that immigration is ruining America, and they got to preserve white culture. Another strategy to deal with this person. Both those people, you would say, are living in some form or another of a different reality, and you're trying to infiltrate that and trying to show them how ridiculous their ideas are in some way, and you have different approaches to them. When you get to like deep state ideological conspiracy theorists like QAnon, which unfortunately has become much more mainstream in the past year, I'd say, with the coronavirus lockdown, and then leading up to the election, and now with this whole storming of the Capitol. I mean, a lot of the leading people there were members of this ideology. These are people that when you listen to them talk, you're talking about this guy in the car, right? Who was just like, oh, like you've got the violence gene or whatever, and how he's like off in this other reality. QAnon people are like in a different universe. Like these are people that believe not only that not only do they ideologically believe the opposite of what you or I believe, but they believe that everything, all forms of information are corrupted, and we're all being manipulated by like a secret deep state. We can't trust anything. We can't trust scientists. We can't trust doctors. We can't trust journalists. Like it's all bad, and they're all in it together. How do you like? I don't know if you've dealt with any of these people firsthand, but like when you look at that from like the outside looking in, how do you deal with that? Like in your strategy, like in your kind of relational way, like is there? Because you're talking about like this Minds platform, right? And it's like this whole idea, like, hey, let's get our ideas out there. We might not agree. We might be in different, realities, so to speak. But you can say your piece. I can say my piece. What do you do when someone is just sharing information that's like worlds apart? That's like not even remotely tethered to reality. You know what I mean?
Let's hope that allow them to share it.
Yeah.
I would say allow them to share it. I don't have all the answers by any means. But allow them to share, because somewhere on that platform there may be somebody or various people who may have the answers, who may have better answers than I do, and that can address it. But nothing can be addressed unless it's heard. It's important to know where people are coming from in order to know how to address them. I haven't had a lot of dealings. I haven't had any dealings. I mean, I know some people who are into that QAnon stuff, but I don't know them very well.
Yeah.
I never really talked to them about it. I'm certainly aware of it. I have another group that's similar are the Westboro Baptist people.
Right.
And I have had conversations with one of Fred Phelps' daughters, and man, she was like way out there.
Mm-hmm.
There was no reeling her back in. At least not at that point. I only spent about maybe 10 minutes with her, talking to her on the sidewalk. When she was protesting, calling all these kids gay at this art school. Where and everybody in the military is gay.
Right.
All this other kind of stuff. Maybe with more time, I could spend more time with them and get a sense of how they arrive at that and this and the other, and come up with an answer. But I don't have any myself right now. That wasn't the realm with which I was dealing. But I would say, allow them on the platform. I mean, if they truly believe that, and there are some who probably just want to make up a conspiracy.
Yeah, troll.
Troll and get some attention or whatever. Like the guy in the bullhorns and the wild outfit, and who dresses like that to go to a protest? Because you're going to be filmed,
right?
Your picture's going to be in Newsweek magazine or whatever else. So that's what that was all about, if you ask me.
Yeah,
I don't even know if he believes what he was saying. But anyway, I would say people who actually believe that stuff, let them be heard, because there's somebody out there with some degree of psychoanalysis of that or this, that, or the other, that would have a solution, or together we can come up with solutions and figure out how to address that, because that's a whole new thing.
Yeah, it is new. Yeah,
it's not just a different reality. It's a different alternate universe.
Yeah, and I think I appreciate your honesty and your humility in approaching that. This is something that I've been deep into, like researching, following the past couple years, more closely the past like 6 months, I'd say. And it's
I do know flat earthers, or at least a couple of them, and people who don't believe that we walked on the moon.
and they're up there too, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. There's a lot of crossover within these communities, and I think that's what's fascinating to me, is trying to figure out, like you said, where do they get these ideas? How do they form these ideologies? A lot of it, from my experience and like what I've come to understand, is just that over the course of decades, there's these kind of intersecting factors that are all kind of at play. Like there's the religious factor, which is a primarily like American evangelicalism, this idea that that these Christians are in America, and America is God's chosen country, and that they need to prepare it because heaven is coming to earth, and they need to get it ready for the end times, essentially. And they believe that as time has gone on, over the decades, that they've essentially lost what they deem as the culture war. Like gay marriage is legalized, trans rights becoming normalized, abortion, they aren't overturning Roe v. Wade. There's all these things that they feel like they've lost ground on, and that they don't have a cultural influence. At least, like, obviously you and I know, like when it comes to our institutions, our top politicians and leaders are still white Christian males and so on. But to them, like they've lost the culture as they view it. And QAnon to them is a solution where it kind of intersects, so similar to the moral majority in like the 80s with Ronald Reagan and Jerry Falwell, where there's this kind of uniting of conservative values with Christian values. And now that this kind of Trump era of like the truth being relativized, and we're all in kind of like a postmodern hell where you can live in whatever reality you want to live in. These people have conjured basically a reality that comforts them and tells them exactly what they want to hear, which is that everything that, like, whether it's the education system, which they believe is corrupt and manipulating the youth, or whether it's scientists who they believe are corrupt, climate change being fake, stem cell research being evil, all that type of stuff. Whether it's politicians who they just don't trust, in the media who they don't trust. It kind of gives them a meta narrative to tie all their prejudices and their biases together. And then, of course, at the extreme ends of it, there's much more anti-Semitism and really like hateful extreme stuff buried in. But it's fascinating because, I have family members who are into this ideology. I know people in my hometown who are into it, and it's difficult. But in my own personal experience, I was interested to hear your thoughts. I have found that exactly what you're saying when talking to white nationalists is essentially a similar inroad with these people, which is trying to understand their reality and also like learning when to give and take, like learning like, hey, obviously, like, hey, where I'm coming from, I don't believe there's some secret cannibal pedophile deep state that's controlling the world. However, I do believe that there are many corrupt, instances where the U.S. government has done horrible, atrocious things that we can look back on throughout history. Like the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. We can look at, like all the coups the CIA has helped infiltrate. So there's so many, there's ways to find common ground, but it's a mess.
What do they say, or what proof do they offer that the government is involved in this QAnon deep state?
Well, so they don't have proof. So every claim is unfalsifiable. They believe that this character who they call Q, who communicates to these online message boards that are typically run by neo-Nazis and white nationalists and so on. This character anonymously sends these encrypted messages, and has been doing so for years, to which they interpret as being this character is working with Trump behind the scenes. So it literally is like a role-playing narrative where this person, I think what helped jumpstart it years ago was that this person made a couple really, really loose predictions that came true. Like, I think one of the first ones that caught traction was this person said on a message board that Trump was going to tweet something with like the word small in it soon, and then the next day Trump tweeted about Small Business Saturday, and then everybody thought that was like a sign that this person was working with Trump. So there's been like a couple moments like that where they've used it's like, hey, this person has some like high level, intelligence within the government, and we got to trust them. But in terms of like tangible material evidence, like there is none. I mean, it's a lot of just, and again, because they believe the media is fake,
Right.
and that the news is fake, you can't, like, if you try to fact check them or like, send them an article to be like, hey, no, this, what you said that this thing happened, actually this thing happened. They just say, oh, and you
Right.
can't believe that. So
Unlike UFO people who can produce some kind of pictures and things like that, and I've seen things. I saw one thing that could have been a UFO. I don't know, but at least people do see things.
right,
And they have
me too,
photographs
Daryl.
of them.
Yeah, I saw what I thought was a UFO too, and I still don't know what to make of it. But
Me
yeah,
too,
I
me
see what
too.
you mean though. There's like there's kind of a
An evidence.
exactly like an experience or something that they can draw. But it's such a, I don't want to get too far into it because I know this isn't something that you specialize in necessarily, but it is such an extreme and growing ideology that is tangential to a lot of these
The
like,
danger of that is, the Q person or whatever you call him, the leader, can end up being another Jim Jones or the guy, I forgot now what his name is, but he had, lured in all kinds of super intelligent people, professionals. They were going to chase Halley's Comet or something,
mm-hmm.
and they all committed suicide to do it. Remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I do remember
And
that.
of
Yeah,
course, Jim Jones drinking the Kool-Aid and all
of
that
course.
business.
Yeah, no, it is terrifying. It's been a lot of cult experts classify it as a cult. It's one of those, the term cult is so loosely defined and depending on the context, but it's often seen that way. But we don't have to stay on this. I appreciate, the feedback and you humoring me with that. But just to kind of like jump back into this, I guess, kind of on the topic of how to have conversations with extremists. Something that I view within the again, talking about the broad toolbox of ways we can handle these scenarios, I view public debate as one potential tool in the toolbox. And I say this with a few caveats, most prominently being if somebody like myself or like yourself wanted to publicly debate, like let's say a white nationalist on like a CNN program or on a podcast or something like that, I think there's a responsible way of doing that if the person is highly knowledgeable and has answers, for all of their bad faith, lines of argument and all that. But obviously that's not the case in every interaction. Like there's times where people are tricked, manipulated. There's times when white nationalists, Nazis are able to get the upper hand, rhetorically speaking, in a debate. So from your perspective, like when we talk about all of this as like a broad umbrella, deradicalization, fighting racism, and all these ways, do you view public discourse directly with these people as a net benefit, or do you think it should be retained to private conversations and that we should not platform their voices in that way?
No, I believe we should platform their voices, and I'll tell you why. I don't like to necessarily frame it as a debate or fighting racism. I mean, yes, that's what we're doing. Words mean a lot, and words can set the tone also, whether they're intended that way or not. Rather than frame it as a debate, frame it as a conversation. Because that, as soon as you say debate, the hackles come up and, the fists are ready to
exactly. Yeah, you walk in with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just frame it as a conversation. I want to hear what you have to say, and I want you to hear what we have to say. Let's talk about it. Of course, we're going to debate to some level, but frame it as a conversation to keep the temperature down.
Right.
And also, fighting racism, rather than say fighting racism, perhaps say healing racism.
But I guess, so on that note though, really quick, again, I think there's like a good and a bad way to do that though, right?
Yeah,
like I can, you might not, no, real quick, you might not be familiar with these people, but I'm sure people in the audience will know at least one or two of them. But there's this one reporter / news commentator named David Pakman.
I know him. I've done his podcast.
Okay, great. Yeah, so he's most prominent on YouTube. And in the past, at one point, he interviewed Richard Spencer. And it's about like a 30-minute interview. And I always use this interview as an example of one way that you can platform a racist, because he formatted it. It was an interview. It wasn't formatted like a debate. He invited him on to share his ideas. He asked Richard Spencer direct questions about his beliefs. He allowed him time to answer, but for every one of his answers, he had a very pointed, very sharp response and very sharp follow-up questions to challenge what his beliefs were and to show the audience like this isn't something, I'm asking questions, I'm allowing him the space to answer, but I'm not allowing him to run the show. And you contrast that with other people I've seen on YouTube. There's this other similar commentator with a different ideology named Chen, who also interviewed Richard Spencer. And it's the same exact format, except in that interview, Richard Spencer essentially just had free reign to spread his ideology and walk all over her. And she didn't really offer up any substantive challenge. So do you view that as a problem, or do you just say, hey, let the chips fall, let the ideas fall where they are, and let people decide?
No, I think people should be well qualified to challenge, and so that you have a good conversation on both sides. Because the more people see what is going on and don't hide it, the sooner it will be addressed. Now, yes, and the other side of that argument is, well, you platform Richard Spencer, some people are going to fall prey and go join his cult or, whatever else, they're going to be sucked in. Yes, that can happen, but I'm an optimist and I believe in the inherent good and intelligence of most people. Oftentimes they get sucked into stuff that they've never even seen, they've only heard about, like the QAnon business, or the flat earthers and stuff, right? But you put somebody on display who's spewing a bunch of nonsense, they're going to be a good amount of people out there going to say, man, this guy's a nutcase, and they're going to try to, and they're going to be like, man, we got to do something about this. This has to be addressed. This is just crazy. Like, I'm glad they showed the siege at the Capitol. Who would have believed it before? Okay.
And people still don't believe it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Listen, a lot of, it was a bittersweet thing that happened to George Floyd. People like me, we've been seeing this for decades. We've been complaining about it for decades, but we've been complaining about it on our own. And that's why we haven't gotten very far. All right. Now, the coronavirus was a bad thing, still is a bad thing. On the upside of it, what happened? People were out of work. They couldn't go to work. Their businesses are shut down. They're at home. They're on lockdown. What do they do on lockdown? They're browsing the internet. They're watching TV. And what do they see? They see a murder, a lynching unfolding right before their eyes. An 8-minute and 46-second lynching taking place. What's the difference between putting a knee on someone's neck and slowly choking them to death than hanging them in a tree and choking them to death on a rope? It's still a lynching, right? They're watching that like, oh my goodness, I don't believe this. Black people believed it. We believed it for years, decades. A lot of white people who never believed it, why are those people always complaining? They're always exaggerating. The police don't do things like that, blah, blah, blah. Now they're watching it. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, how did we never know this was happening?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what did they do? What is the difference between the civil rights marches or the protest marches of the civil rights era and the marches today in the wake of George Floyd? The marches of yesteryear, yes, they turned some pages, but very slowly. Those marches were predominantly black people. There was a smattering of white people. There always has been a smattering of white people who got it, and they marched with us back then. All right. I'm not taking anything away from those marches, but the powers that be is a polite way of saying the white power structure. Mm-hmm. They're looking at the marches of yesteryear. They see all these black people with a few white faces. They plug their ears. They don't want to hear what we have to say. They just shut us down and ignore us. Today, after George Floyd, the powers that be are looking at these marches, and what's the difference? There's a whole sea of black people and a whole sea of white people marching together, because those people on lockdown, they're like watching this, man, we got to do something. And despite the health risk to themselves with coronavirus, they came out of their homes. these white people, and joined us in the streets and marched with us. And the powers that be saw this and like, oh my goodness, there are more people there that look like us. They started pulling out their earplugs or else putting in their hearing aids and began listening to what was going on. And as a result of that collective voice, changes began happening a lot faster, and improvements were being made. And we have seen today a larger ripple effect than we've ever seen in history. I would say we're in the best place in history that we've ever been right now, because that ripple effect happened immediately and it was widespread. What I mean by ripple effect is this. These marches after George Floyd were geared predominantly towards the police. The ripple effect was this. NASCAR banning the Confederate flag. NASCAR was ground zero for the Confederate flag.
Right.
The state of Mississippi, the sovereign state of Mississippi, of all places, taking the Confederate portion out of their main state flag. Food labels like Aunt Jemima's, Uncle Ben's, rebranding their labels. Police officers getting arrested the same week, and charged. That didn't happen in the past. If an officer were to be charged, it would take months and months and months if that person was to be charged. Now they're getting charged and fired, like boom, boom, boom. Legislation being written to take down Confederate statues, to change names on buildings of slave owners, and things like change names that were named after slave owners on these different buildings. Take down Confederate soldiers or monuments and things like that. This is happening, boom, 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 boom. We've never seen that kind of ripple effect. What is the difference? An all-Black march and a collective march. And this is what we need to focus on. We need to get more of that collective. And how do you do it? By platforming what's going on. All right, so yes, let's put Richard Spencer out there. Let's put whoever out there so more people can see the nonsense and foolishness and dangerousness that's happening with this kind of thinking. If CNN and whoever else, Fox News and MSNBC and other stations did not show what was going on at the Capitol, would people believe that? Probably not.
Yeah. I think wait. Oh no, go ahead. No, finish your thought. Sorry.
I was going to say, so people see that, they're like, whoa, something needs to be done. We cannot let our country, go in that direction.
Right.
So what do I have to do? We have to come together and contest and fight this.
So much of what you're highlighting here just reemphasizes this idea of optics and perception being everything. Because I think one of the critiques I hear from a lot of activist friends of mine, to the point of a lot of what you just named as things that have changed in the aftermath of the protests and George Floyd's death, is that a lot of these, like whether it's taking down statues or rebranding, slogans and logos, or like addressing, putting out statements about what's going on, a lot of this is seen as aesthetics in some way, seen as like, this isn't like a structural thing. This is like a branding, like marketing thing, to which I say, yes, we can acknowledge, of course, there's like a sort of like bottom line in which brands, when I say brands, I mean, this could be institutions, corporations, whatever. Brands, of course, want to protect their bottom line. They want to appeal to the broadest audience possible. So when they see, the millions of the multicultural marches with all these people, they see a market and they say, oh, well, everybody's doing this thing. Now it's okay to say Black Lives Matter. It's no longer this kind of political polarizing thing that we have to stray from. To which I say, hell, it might not be, the overnight structural change that we need to see faster, of course, but it's definitely not nothing. I definitely agree with you to say that these changes, to me, they all of them combined are they come together in shifting our cultural Overton window in a direction that is more inclusive, more understanding, and also just broadly, like you're saying, gives people a window into these realities that Black Americans are facing every day, and Black people are facing every day. So I think that is really important. And I also agree to your point that, when it comes to platforming, the Nazis and all that, I think, like you mentioned on the onset, there's a right way and there's a wrong way of doing it. And I to the same point I would make about the protests, how the optics matter there, the optics really matter as well when it comes to these online conversations and debates, because a lot of the audiences tend to veer young, especially on like YouTube and the platform like I'm streaming on Twitch. And when kids, especially, but people in general, I mean, we're all susceptible to this, but especially kids see two people having a conversation, we don't like to admit this. Like you and I are having like a cordial conversation here, but I think oftentimes what people, when they engage in these kind of discussions, it's all about like a strongman battle. You know, they want to have the upper hand. You know, they want to be seen as like who's winning, you know, who's destroying the other person in this conversation. Yeah, Jerry Springer. So I think that is, whether you or I like that or not, I think we have to acknowledge that it's a part of the optics when we engage in these conversations, and it is an important part of you know, if we're going to have interviews, if we're going to have debates, however you want to frame it, we have to go in prepared, knowing that even if we say the audience is intelligent and they're able to make decisions for themselves, they also are going to be swayed inevitably by these sort of power dynamics within a conversation over who sounds the most right. So definitely, just to reiterate that, I think it definitely matters.
Absolutely. And, you know, we also have to also bring perspective to why we believe certain things, to educate, not, you know, especially young people, not just, you know, these people own slaves, or these people were Confederate generals, and so therefore they need to come down. That's not good enough. There has to be more to it than that, so they understand. Well, they've been up there for so long. Why not just leave them up there? No. Let's look at it this way. So here's how I would frame that to offer this perspective. Do I believe they should come down? Absolutely, they should come down. I believe they should be taken down, not ripped down. And they should, but I'll get to that in a second. Look, the majority of white people in this country are of British descent. They were the first to come here. They want to escape the tyranny of the king, and they came to the New World or whatever, right? At least that's what we all learned in history class. So we went to, you know, this was a British colony at one time. We went to war against Britain, and we won. The United States won that war. It was called the Revolutionary War, and that's why we won, which is why we celebrate the 4th of July every year. Now, there are plenty of white people here in this country who are of British ancestry, and they can still go to Britain, to Scotland, England, Wales, and wherever else, and find, you know, third cousins removed or whatever relations. But and I'm sure they love their ancestors, but they don't honor their ancestors by building statues of King George out here in the United States and flying the Union Jack. Britain lost. King George lost. So the loser does not get to build his statue and fly his flag on the winner's land.
Right.
All right. We went to war against Japan when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. There are plenty of Japanese Americans in this country, and we did them wrong, right? We put them in internment camps.
Of course, yeah.
Okay, but those Japanese Americans, they gave up their Japanese citizenship and became Americans, just like you or I. They had ancestors who fought against us, and I'm sure they love their ancestors, you know, that because without them they wouldn't be here. But they don't honor them by building statues of Emperor Hirohito and flying the Japanese flag out here on the winner's land. Japan lost.
Well, especially when our statues are based, you know, directly in dehumanizing other people. I mean, it's not even like oh, this culture beat that culture. It's like these statues represent a very specific ideology as well.
Right, exactly too. And we went to war against Germany. Of course, there are Americans here of German descent, and you know they had ancestors who were in the Third Reich because they had no choice. You either were with Hitler or you escaped. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you were exterminated one way or the other. He was a dictator. So they honor their ancestors, but they're not out here building statues in America of Adolf Hitler and Joseph Goebbels and Joseph Mengele and flying swastikas unless they're, you know, neo-Nazis or something. So the loser does not get to build his or her statues and fly his or her flags on the winner's land. Well, guess what? The Confederacy lost the war. I don't care how much heritage you have in the Confederacy. I have heritage in the Confederacy. Okay, anybody who knows American history knows that there were blacks who also fought in the Confederacy. So did Jews, all right, in the South. The Confederacy was fought over slavery. I mean, the Civil War was fought over slavery. That's it, end of story, over slavery. In the South, in the school systems, they don't say that. In the North, they do. In the
Right.
South school system, they don't say that. They say the Civil War was fought over states' rights.
Right. Of course, states' rights to do what?
To own a slave.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So either way, okay, anybody, like I said, black people fought in the Confederacy. I was born in Chicago. The only reason I was born there is because my parents happened to be there because of my dad's job. But my mother and father are from Roanoke and Salem, Virginia. Virginia was the seat of the Confederacy. I am a descendant of slaves. I had ancestors who fought in the Confederacy. Do I honor my ancestors? Absolutely. Okay, but I don't honor the Confederacy. All right, and I certainly don't honor slavery. But without my ancestors, I wouldn't be here. They fought in the Confederacy. They had to. They were slaves. All right. So these people, these white people, well, my great great grandfather fought in the Confederacy, and I want to fly my flag and have, and honor these statues. You lost the war. Get over it.
Yeah.
This is not the CSA, Confederate States of America. It's the USA.
Well, and to that point, you brought up the Nazi example. I mean, I know from listening to your interviews that you've collected a lot of these KKK robes, and that one day you want to open up a museum, like to showcase all this memorabilia and these robes that people have given up in a way to tell their stories and to not forget this terrible part of our history. We know, like, we have Holocaust museums. We have places to express and to showcase those parts of our history in an environment that tells those stories and doesn't celebrate them in a way, which is so different, right?
And speaking of which, I'm loaning a lot of my neo-Nazi stuff and KKK stuff to the Orlando, Florida Holocaust Center.
Oh wow!
They're gonna have an exhibition on my work there. They'll be opening up later this year, and it'll be there for a year. Then it'll travel the country and come back to me. So hopefully by that time I will have a building of my own to house all the stuff that I have.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Museum.
Awesome. We're coming up toward the end of our time, Daryl. I really, really appreciate you giving me this much time to have this conversation. It's
my
been
pleasure.
It's been enlightening. Like I can't tell you how much it means to me. I guess just like to close it up. I mean, like, you seem like a really hopeful guy, and like I know you kind of mentioned the sort of glass half full. What can we take from the death of George Floyd? What can we take from the situation of coronavirus? I mean, when you look at race relations right now, when you look at everything going on the Capitol and the rising rates of extremism, what is like something, it could be one thing, it could be just like an aura that you're getting or whatever you want to call it. Like, what's something that's giving you hope for like our future right now as Americans and the world at large?
That collective voice that I saw in the wake of George Floyd. I've always had hope and optimism because, as I said earlier on, I lived in the future 10 years ahead of my time when I was in school with kids from all over the world, and my peers were only in school with people who looked like them at the time. So I saw what the future could hold, and everybody got along. We didn't speak the same language, we didn't look alike, but we played together, we worked together, we had slumber parties together, all that kind of thing. It does work and it can work. And unfortunately, as I said before, most Americans don't travel. So perhaps I can bring some of my travels vicariously to those who don't and show them that, the world is more than just the United States. We can get along with each other. In fact, one of my favorite quotes of all time is the travel quote by Mark Twain, who said, "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime," which is so true.
Great quote.
And we all can learn from that. I am very hopeful, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this. And trust me, as a musician, which is my passion, I would much rather be on stage with my band playing rock and roll and looking out and seeing people dance to my music than being at a Klan rally watching people in men in robes parade around a burning cross and yelling white power.
Absolutely. Well, you inspire me. I come from a songwriting background myself, and I find myself in a lot of these cultural polarizing conversations over race and just and all these extremist topics in general. So, I really admire your work. I know that you recently launched a podcast called Changing Minds. I can link that in the show notes.
With Daryl Davis.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Do you have anything else you want to plug? Like anywhere else you want people to follow your work?
Yeah, I just finished writing my second book. The first book called Clandestine Relationships, a nonfiction book about my exploits. And the second book is called The Klan Whisperer. And the first book came out in 1997. So a lot of things have happened since then that have fueled white supremacy. For example, we've had a Black president since then. We've had more immigration. We've had Donald Trump. We've had all kinds of stuff go on. So it's a continuation, and it'll be out this year. It's with the publishers now because I just finished it. But I encourage people to follow me on Twitter. Go to my website, daryldavis.com, DAROYL, only one R, and don't sit back. Our country can only become one of two things. It can become, number one, that which we sit back and watch it become, or number two, that which we stand up and make it become. And as Americans, we all have to ask ourselves this question: do I want to sit back and see what my country becomes, or do I want to stand up and make my country become what I want to see? And that's a question I can't tell you how to answer. You have to answer it for yourself. But think about it. If you don't want to be on the front line like myself, that's fine. Don't be on the front line. Be on the back line. Be on the sideline. Be online, but be doing something.
Right.
Don't just be sitting back.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Daryl. Really appreciate your time. Again, we'll include all those links in the show notes and all that. But yeah, thank you for all you do, and keep on doing the work.
Thank you, Nathan. Let's consider this part one, and sometime we'll do a part two.
I would love that. That'd be fantastic. And shout out to Nan for putting this together. I really appreciate that. So
yeah,
all right,
well, Annette.
Yeah, have a great night, and hopefully talk someday soon. All right.
Sounds good. Take care.
All right,
Bye-bye.
Take care.